Full spoilers for the Crow comic book, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and the Look Back manga ahead. In 1989, James O'Barr published the comic book series The Crow. The Crow is a work haunted by tragedy, both before and after its publication. The 2011 reprinting of The Crow, labeled Special Edition, has a foreword by the author, so I'll let him speak for himself. It all comes down to this. I was a careless teenager who hadn't paid his car insurance. The local cops knew my car on sight, so I phoned my fiancée and said, "Sweetie, why don't you pick me up? I really can't afford another ticket right now." On her way to her car to pick me up, she was run down by a drunk driver, killed on the spot. But in my mind, in some sort of distorted monkey logic, I was responsible. If I'd only paid my car insurance, if I'd only waited 10 more minutes to call, if I'd only said, "I'll just see you tomorrow, pumpkin." If. There was nothing in my future but nothingness. I'd hoped by putting all my murderous fury into ink on paper that somehow, magically, all the pain, hurt, and self-destructive behavior that followed would dissolve. The Crow is the story of Eric, a young man who, along with his fiancée Shelley, is attacked and killed by a group of junkies on the side of the road outside of Detroit. Eric and Shelley both die, with Shelley first being brutally assaulted. Eric, however, refuses to truly die and is resurrected by a supernatural crow, becoming the Crow, a sort of vengeful spirit who tracks down and kills the men responsible for the crime. The Crow, Eric, is not a hero. He is closer to the traditional idea of a ghost than he is to a superhero. He doesn't help people, he kills them, the worst among them. Often when he shows up to kill these men, they'll be in the middle of another crime, another murder, but he doesn't intervene like you would expect a Spider-Man or a Batman to. He reveals himself just after they have killed or otherwise harmed someone else. He is an incarnation of vengeance and fury, not justice or protection. As the story says, he screams and pounds his head against the wall until wailing phantom fire trucks paces across his vision. Pain is all he wants. And hate, yes, hate. We shall never forget, and never forgive, and never ever fear. Fear is for the enemy. Fear and bullets. At the same time, Eric is a spirit of nostalgia. Between the scenes of ultraviolence and revenge, we see Eric hide away in old photographs, and even in his memories. The Crow that resurrected him often rebukes him for this, telling him not to look, not to touch this live wire that will cause him further harm. But he always does, not only remembering the good moments with Shelley, but the bad. These memories often end with him reliving Shelley's death all over again. Eric cannot look away, just like he couldn't look away from her assault. He needs to suffer, even by his own actions. He cannot move on from his grief, because that grief is all that is left of him, the only part of him still wandering the earth after his death. The Crow was highly successful, and that success led to a Hollywood movie being made just a few short years later. In 1993, the lead actor of the film, Brandon Lee, was shot and killed during filming by a gun which had a real bullet lodged in the barrel that was not caught by inspection before filming. This bullet was dislodged and fired when the dummy cartridge, loaded with powder and primer but no bullet, went off. Again, in O'Barr's own words, "At the time, the same guilt and self-hatred swelled again in my soul, threatening to drown me, suffocate me." The Crow, both the comic book and the 1994 film, are beloved. In channeling his pain and his guilt and his fury into, as he put it, ink on paper, O'Barr created a work of art, a widely celebrated work of art. In creating The Crow, James O'Barr became what we have collectively come to romanticize and idealize as the platonic ideal of the artist, the tortured artist. I'm sure you can think of examples of this archetype off the top of your head: Vincent van Gogh, Sylvia Plath, Kurt Cobain. There is this idea that great art comes from a place of great pain, and so our greatest artists must be those among us who are suffering the most. And why not? All of these artists have famously suffered, and all of them have made great art. But has it helped them, the artists? Well, it certainly didn't help Van Gogh or Plath or Cobain in the end. We, the public, got some great art out of it, sure, and they all died tragically young deaths. Obar is, thankfully, still alive and well today, but when he speaks of The Crow in hindsight, it is with the tone of mixed feelings. Obar credits writing The Crow with helping him survive his grief at all, but also says that it deepened his guilt and his sorrow and his despair. In May of 1994, Obar gave an interview with the Boston Phoenix. In the interview, he says, "Writing The Crow didn't help at all. I thought it would be cathartic, but as I drew each page, it made me more self-destructive, if anything. There is anger on each page, little murders. I was more messed up by the time I was done with the book." And later in the interview, speaking about Lee's death, he says, "I felt the exact same pain for Lee's fiancée, Eliza Hutton. I relived the same pain and anger as before. I wished I had never written the thing, though if I hadn't, I probably wouldn't be here, having been consumed by very self-destructive behavior. I was fueled by rage and fury for years and years. My soul felt like a hurricane." I don't speak for James Obar. I don't know him. His words make it easy to draw comparison to Eric staring back at his memories of Shelley. Obar's words indicate that rather than a cathartic release, writing The Crow was a way to re-traumatize himself, to relive tragedy, a way to hold on to his pain and anger and hate. How do we process great works of art made from that sort of pain and tragedy? Art that might have been more harmful than helpful. Is that what we want from our artists? Is that what we expect from them? If that's what it takes to make art, then why would anyone make art? There is a therapeutic quality to art. Obar himself credits The Crow with saving his own life in that quote above. But it is also easy to lose yourself in that art. There is a danger that in your worst moments, you will immerse yourself in art and forget to come back up for air. Before we move on to the next section of the video, talking about Clair Obscur, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. I've always struggled with insomnia, especially in the summer, because I live in one of the hottest places in the country. Well, now it's summer, the days are longer and brighter, the nights are hotter, and it can be really hard to get a good night's sleep. That's why I was delighted when Manta Sleep graciously provided me with a Manta Pro sleep mask and Manta Cool eye cups. The mask is adjustable, so it always fits comfortably, and it has a premium feel that I love, while still blocking out the LEDs and other lights that normally disrupt my sleep, so I wake up feeling refreshed. On nights where the air conditioning just isn't cutting it, pulling the Manta Cool eye cups out of the freezer just before bed lets me cool down and sleep soundly. It's not just great for nights either. Manta Sleep are proudly part of the Pro Nap movement, and both the Pro eye cups and the Cool eye cups do a great job at blocking out that bright summer sunlight. Manta Sleep has a ton of other styles too, like the steam mask, the silk mask, the weighted mask, and even the sound mask, which includes built-in Bluetooth speakers, so if you're one of the people I've seen in my comments saying they use my longer videos to fall asleep, a Manta Sleep mask will be perfect for you. If you're ready to start sleeping better, follow the link in the description and use my coupon code ZULDEM10 to get 10% off your order. Thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it and talk about Clair Obscur. Clair Obscur is, from its opening moments, very clearly trying to say something about art. Art is the main motif of the entire game, as the world is being cruelly destroyed by the Paintress, a godlike figure watching over the entire world from her monolith. Every year, she paints a number, and everyone of that age dies, disappearing into rose petals in an event referred to as a gamage. The number is counting down, and now, in the year that it reaches 33, your expedition sets out, like many before you, to try to take her down. Along the way, you encounter living paintbrushes called gestrals, you explore within magic paintings, you can even see brushstrokes within the user interface while in battle. The symbolism is everywhere. Despite that, it took me a long time to start to get a grasp on what exactly Clair Obscur was trying to use that symbolism to actually say. At the beginning of the game, before you've even left on the expedition, we see the characters of Gustave and Sophie speculating on why the paintress is doing what she's doing.
Sometimes I feel sorry for her.
Who? The paintress?
Look at her. She looks sad. Maybe she's a prisoner too, stuck in the same cycle with us.
And it's true. The paintress looks like someone deeply sad, in a rending of clothes type of way. This line doesn't pay off until very late in the game, when you finally defeat the paintress. And seriously, I'm going to spoil Clair Obscur here. It is very good. You should play it for yourself if you haven't. Clair Obscur isn't actually the story of Gustave, or Lune, or Ciel, or the Expeditioners. It is the story of the Descendre family. You get a lot of hints about this throughout the story, as Maëlle is having repeated visions of a fire in a lavish manner, and as there is a doppelganger of her running around, but the payoff, the reason for all of this symbolism, is that this entire world exists within a magic painting. The paintress is Aline Descendre, the matriarch of a family with the magic power to create these living worlds. This is not an all-a-dream payoff. The people and places seen within the game's world are real. They simply take place on a different plane of reality. Some years before the events of the game, there was a fire maliciously started by rivals of the Descendres, which claimed the life of Aline's son, Verso. The world we are in, the canvas, was originally created by Verso and contains a piece of him. Now, Aline has immersed herself in this world, becoming the paintress, painting a new version of her family, and choosing to live within this world where she can still feel her son's presence instead of returning to the world without him. It is very clear, once the reveal has happened, that being in the canvas for an extended period of time is killing Aline. The painters are not meant to live within the worlds they create. They can visit, but they can't live within them. Aline has been within the canvas for an undetermined amount of time outside of it, and for 67 years within it. Far, far too long, while her body withers, starves, and atrophies. One of Clair Obscur's themes is the distinction between art made from a healthy place, a place of joy, and art made from a destructive place, a place of grief. The creations we see in the game that are from a time before the fire that tore the Descendre family apart have a joy to them and a quiet strength. Esquier, for example, is one of the most powerful creatures in the entire canvas, and was made by the original Verso in his youth as an ideal protector. Strong, yes, but more importantly, able to soothe the emotions of those in pain. Esquier is a very lovable character, one who is eccentric, often speaks in riddles, but who is also very caring of others and helps them through their darkest moments. One of the game's optional dungeons in Act 3 is the Endless Tower, a creation of Clea, the oldest of the Descendre children, when she was younger, and she and her brother would play within the canvas. The final fight of the tower is a boss called Painted Love, a rematch fight against both the Paintress, the form which Aline takes within the canvas, and the Curator, the form which the patriarch of the family, Renoir, takes within the canvas, now fighting together. In the present day, Aline and Renoir are at odds with each other, having drifted apart after Verso died, grieving alone. The version of her parents which Clea painted much earlier, when they were still madly in love with each other, is more beautiful than either of them on their own, and the game communicates this mechanically by having the versions we face here be far stronger than either of their solo boss fights in the main path of the game. An interesting detail within Clair Obscur is that many of the characters within it have hobbies. Hobbies that have nothing to do with their positions in Lumière, the expedition, or the world in general. Lunet plays guitar, Verso plays piano, and in fact we can learn that music was his true passion, which he was forced to ignore due to his mother's insistence, and Gustave likes skipping stones. We see him do it several times throughout the game. In fact, in the very first conversation we see in the game between Maëlle and Gustave, Gustave is skipping stones, and Maëlle quips that he should use his mechanical arm to throw them further, saying that if he could hit the paintress hundreds of miles away, that would actually be useful. Gustave responds,
You know, hobbies don't always have to be useful. I'm enjoying the uselessness of today and readying my usefulness for tomorrow.
The Gestrals, another original creation of Verso's before his death, are pure expressions of this idea, pure celebrations of uselessness. They spend most of their lives in a state of play, expressed through fighting each other in friendly competitions to no real end. It is an easy mistake to try to define the value of art through its utility. How much did creating this art help the artist deal with pain and trauma? How much does viewing it help the audience process their own grief and trauma? What Clair Obscur is saying here, though, is that the true beauty of art is often found in its uselessness. That it is beautiful because of its frivolity, that it is a celebration of the moments in between usefulness. By contrasting the pure joy of this more frivolous art with the pained art of Aline, Renoir, and Clea found throughout the game, Clair Obscur is criticizing the very idea of the tortured artist archetype, which, as a whole, society has come to celebrate. It is saying that not only is expecting our artists to suffer for their art unhealthy for them, it is also not necessarily going to result in truly great art. Aline's art is explicitly how she is dealing with her grief from losing her son, but it is not portrayed as a healthy way to cope. She has returned to a work of art which he created, one which contains a piece of his soul to feel closer to her son instead of dealing with his loss head on. This is portrayed as an addiction, and like addictions, it runs in the family. When you beat the paintress at the end of Act 2, the focus of the game shifts to beating Renoir, who is the actual cause of the gommage, slowly destroying the creations of the canvas in order to kick his wife out of it before she dies. In the end, you are able to defeat Renoir, but along the way, it becomes clear that Maëlle, who is actually the youngest daughter of the Desandre family, Alicia, is falling into the same trap that her mother did. In what we see of the world outside the canvas, her family is shattered. They're distant and cold to each other, and Clea, at least, is very cruel to her. Alicia blames herself for Verso's death, as does her mother, Aline. The world of the painting is one where she can be God, one where she can live with friends who celebrate her, and even someone she perceives as her beloved departed brother. She doesn't want to leave the canvas. She doesn't want to go back to the world where she is the poor, resented Alicia. She wants to stay here in a world where she can be Maëlle. As a note from the painted Alicia says, Maëlle is Alicia as she was meant to be. Aline could not face her grief, and instead immersed herself in a world where she wouldn't have to. Maëlle cannot face her life and wants to stay in a world where she can have a different one. She wants to become the new paintress, a paintress who can bring back everyone she ever lost and can create a world where everyone is happy, a world of her art that she will never have to leave. The painted Verso, though, just wants to die. He's been trapped in this place, aware of what he really is for a very long time. He's suffered loss, just like Alicia has, falling in love with and eventually losing an expeditioner named Julie. He's seen his own family, the painted Desandres, grow apart and become even colder and more resentful of each other than the real Desandres are. Worst of all, with every day of new experiences that passes, he becomes less and less the Verso that Aline remembered, the one whose image he was created in. And yet, Aline and now Maëlle have denied him his own identity, seeing him as just their beloved Verso, and not the man he has become over the past 67 years. He wants to die, and when we meet the real Verso, or at least the piece of his soul that was left behind in the canvas, that Verso wants this whole tired cycle of painting to end too. The final choice of the game is whether you side with Maëlle, who wants to repaint the world and live within it, or Verso, who wants his sister to leave this place behind and to see the canvas destroyed. This is a complicated decision, and there are valid arguments to be made for either choice. The people within the painting are real, they are sentient, and siding with Verso would mean the deaths of Lune, Ciel, Esquier, Minoko, and every other character you've met along the way. At the same time, this canvas is killing the Descendre family. This piece of their son being left behind is making it impossible for any of them to move on from their loss and begin to heal. The people of the canvas, with a few exceptions, are gone by the point in the game where you make this choice. Maëlle is trying to bring them back, but the people she brings back would not be the original paintings created by her brother's soul. They would be forgeries. The destruction of the canvas means that Maëlle, Alicia, could go on to paint her own creations upon her own canvas, together with her surviving family. While I do think this is a complicated question, I also think the game's perspective on what the right choice is made very clear by the endings you get. The titles of those endings summarize it perfectly. If you side with Maëlle, you get an ending titled A Life to Paint. If you side with Verso, you get the ending A Life to Love. A Life to Paint is, on the surface, a happy ending. We see Maëlle back in the city of Lumière, having brought back everyone who was gommaged or otherwise lost over the course of the game. Together, our main characters, with smiles on all of their faces, attend a piano performance by Verso. But as you watch this ending, things start to feel wrong. Verso doesn't want to play, but begins the performance as Maëlle nods. Ciel, Lune, and Maëlle are all wearing the exact same outfit. The game concludes on a close-up of Maëlle's watchful eyes, the same eyes of Aline, in control of the world. Maëlle has not just restored the world, she has replaced it. The happy faces of her loved ones hide a world without free will. Ciel and Lune, characters who until now have been wholly unique from each other and from Maëlle, have been flattened into Maëlle's ideal versions of them, overwritten by what she wants them to be, as symbolized by choosing their clothes for them. Maëlle wants to spend the rest of her life with her brother, not the painted Verso, who she does not see as his own person, and the painted Verso only wants to die, and yet Maëlle has reduced him to her own trained monkey, going through the motions of what she wants. She is overwriting who Verso actually was, and who the painted Verso actually is, forcing him to play a part in her fantasy. The A Life to Love ending is, on the surface, more bittersweet. We see Alicia back in her own world. We see the characters from the canvas all waving at Alicia as they disappear forever. It hurts, it's painful, but they are facing it together. The family has finally let go of the loss that's been tearing them apart, and now they can finally heal. Instead of making forgeries of Verso's art, they can create their own beautiful art in his memory. You can debate what the ethical choice to make in this situation would be all day. Verso's ending is sacrificing an entire world for the sake of one family healing from their trauma, but it is clear to me that that isn't the level which Clair Obscur wants to operate at. When you look at the way these endings are framed, it becomes clear. Clair Obscur is saying that art can be a place to channel grief, but you cannot live off of your art alone. At some point, you have to let go and move on. Alicia cannot drown in a fantasy. Aline has to let go of her grief and resentment, and move forward with her family. However hard it may be, at some point you have to resurface. You have to face your grief directly, or else it will overtake you. Look Back, a manga one-shot by Tatsuki Fujimoto published in 2021, is the story of two girls, Fujino and Kyomoto, both artists whose lives intersect because of their art. In elementary school, Fujino's life is already at a crossroads. All of Fujino's classmates are impressed with her comic strip in the school newspaper, saying that she could be a professional manga artist one day. But she's not sure she wants to do that, and she's also very good at sports and could become an athlete. When the shut-in Kyomoto begins publishing strips next to hers in the school newspaper, which absolutely blow hers out of the water, Fujino begins to take art seriously for the first time in an attempt to surpass Kyomoto. The cover of Look Back is taken from this section of the manga, showing Fujino hunched over a desk practicing her art. In its early pages, Look Back is a story about how people shape each other's lives, how friendships and rivalries can make us better versions of ourselves, how we raise each other up by setting the standards for each other, both artistically and as human beings. Fujino starts trying, sacrificing chances to see her friends at school and do fun childhood activities for the sake of a single-minded determination to be an artist. Fujino's art does improve. Her art does get better. At the same time, there was an opportunity cost. Not only did she forsake her friendships and her childhood experiences to improve her art, she didn't spend that time leaning into her natural talent for sports to become an athlete. Despite all of her effort and all of those sacrifices, Fujino never feels like her art compares to Kyomoto's, no matter how hard she tries. When she eventually meets Kyomoto, though, she learns that Kyomoto feels the same way about her. While her art skills might be technically stronger, Fujino's strips had actual writing, as opposed to just being reflections of the world, and the level of improvement in Fujino's work has been clear. Those gag manga she had been drawing have impressed Kyomoto just as much, if not more, than Kyomoto's still lifes have impressed Fujino. The two form a friendship, a tight bond that not only leads to artistic success as they begin to get recognition beyond their school, winning real money from one-shot contests, it leads to the shut-in Kyomoto coming out of her shell, gaining confidence from her friendship. After graduation, the two go their separate ways, as Fujino goes straight to writing a successful weekly manga in Shonen Jump, Shark Kick, and Kyomoto goes off to improve her craft at a university. Unfortunately, the story takes a dark turn when the university Kyomoto is attending is attacked by an axe-wielding man, claiming his work was plagiarized by the university, and Kyomoto is killed. This comes out of nowhere, and feels like it interrupts the story we've been reading up to this point to completely change it into a different one. And that's perfect. When tragedy strikes, that's exactly how it feels. Like your life has been suddenly derailed unexpectedly, with no consideration for the narrative trajectory you thought your life was on. The rest of Look Back is about Fujino's grief. Her guilt over believing that it's her fault Kyomoto has died, that if she'd never helped Kyomoto out of her shell, she may have still been a shut-in, but she'd also still be alive. At the beginning of the story, as young as elementary school, Fujino's life was at a crossroads, and she went down a path that she's no longer convinced was the right one. Fujino has sacrificed a lot, an entire lifetime of her time and effort for the sake of her art, and now she has come to resent that art. She sees a comic strip she drew, the strip that coaxed Kyomoto out of her room all those years ago, and tears it apart in tears, saying that drawing is useless. Above all else, Look Back is a story about regret. The story is called Look Back because it is about an artist looking back at their career and wondering if they'd be better off and if the world would be better off if they'd never created their art in the first place. As Fujino looks back at her life, we, the audience, get a glimpse at another timeline, a world where Fujino and Kyomoto never became friends. In this world, Fujino channeled all of that effort into martial arts instead. This is the other path that Fujino's life could have gone down, the path that she now believes she should have taken, because it would have meant Kyomoto got to keep living. In this world, though, Kyomoto still comes out of her shell. She still goes to the same art university, and it is still attacked. In this world, Fujino just happens to be nearby. She intervenes, and she stops the attacker before he can hurt anyone. While she doesn't get to see it, only the audience does, this alternate world absolves Fujino of her guilt. And yes, I do think it is clear in the manga that this alternate world is real and not just a fantasy, because we see a comic strip that Kyomoto draws cross back over into Fujino's world. Even without that, though, it should be clear to the reader that it's not Fujino's fault that Kyomoto was killed. It's the fault of the attacker, no one else. What Look Back is saying, then, is that there is no point in regret, in guilt, over things you have no control over. We can look back at our own lives and see these points that feel like crossroads, like the crossroads which the manga presents Fujino's life as being at, and we think we see how things could have worked out perfectly if we'd done something differently. But there's no way of knowing how things would be different if you'd done things differently. Maybe there's a job offer you think you should have taken, maybe there's a date you think you should have gone on, maybe you think you should have picked a different university to attend. Maybe you see a better version of your life that you could be living if you'd handled any of these decisions differently. But that version of yourself is illusory. For all you know, picking those options could have ended with you getting hit by a bus. There is no way of knowing, so there is no point in looking back and regretting the choices you did make. In the last pages of the manga, while grieving in Kyomoto's old home, while questioning her entire career and life thus far, Fujino sees that Kyomoto, who she had increasingly lost touch with, had a shelf with every Shark Kick tankobon on it. Kyomoto was still Fujino's fan, still finding motivation through her art after everything. Fujino remembers a conversation she had with Kyomoto. She says to Kyomoto, "You know, to begin with, I don't even like drawing manga. It's not fun. The entire process is a hassle, it's super unglamorous too. You can draw all day and still be nowhere near finished. Really, I'd be better off just sticking to reading manga. I shouldn't draw it." Kyomoto responds, "Then why do you draw, Fujino?" These are the last words spoken in the story. An important detail is that when Fujino stops the attack in the alternate timeline, Kyomoto talks to her as she's being loaded into an ambulance, and we learn that here, in this alternate version of events, Fujino still plans on returning to manga. She still finds herself drawn to art. Why do you draw, Fujino? Personally, I think this is the answer. This scene in an alternate timeline where Fujino has lived a completely different life and yet still finds herself pulled back to the world of art. It's not therapy, at least not effective therapy. It is not, on its own, enough to carry you through your grief. It's not always useful, and it shouldn't be. You make art because you don't have a choice. Because when you have art inside of you, art that truly needs to be shared with the world, you cannot help but let it out. Fujino remembers all the times she shared her art with her friend and how happy it made Kyomoto. She remembers all of the good times they had together as friends because of her art, the connection they made through art. She picks herself up and goes home, tapes the comic strip Kyomoto sent her from another world above her workstation, and gets back to work. At the end of The Crow, after Eric's revenge has come to fruition, we're left with a moment of emptiness where Eric doesn't seem to know what's next. His crow companion says, "The resolution isn't about justice or revenge, it's about forgiveness." "Are you mad?" Eric says angrily. "I could never forgive them." "Not them, idiot," the crow retorts. "Yourself." Eric's quest for vengeance has been useless in helping him. Just as useless as Elaine's delusion or Fujino's regret. Eric has to learn to let go of his guilt and his grief and his rage and his hate to be free. To forgive himself for being unable to protect Shelley in order to join her in the afterlife. In Clair Obscur, the Dissandras as a whole have to learn to let go of their grief, and Maëlle, Alicia, has to forgive herself for getting to live when her brother did not. Holding on to that guilt means living a life to paint, losing herself in her art, drowning in it. Letting go means living a life to love, healing along with her family, and moving forward into the terrifying unknown of a life without Verso. In Look Back, Fujino has to learn to forgive herself for spending her life on her art, to let go of her regret, to stop looking back and wondering what might have been and start living in what is. The story of Look Back is a tragedy, but when tragedy strikes, all you can do is find some way to move on. So what is the value of these pieces of art then? Pieces of art born from grief and pain. Pieces that can help and harm the artist in equal measure. Clair Obscur seems to say these works are actively harmful, but Obar has a different perspective. In the special edition of The Crow, Obar has a section titled Dear You. In it, Obar writes, "Without exception, at every show, comic convention, or screening of The Crow that I attend, someone will come up to me with tears streaming down their face and say, 'Thank you. This book saved my life.' Usually, I hug them and say, 'No, don't be silly. You saved your life. I just let you know that you weren't alone.' Sometimes, in the dark hours amid complete and utter despair, that's all it takes. One voice, one book, one song to know that you are not alone. For me, it was Ian Curtis and Joy Division. Those agonizing wails of hopelessness were my lifeline. Someone understood exactly how I was feeling. I was not alone." Art, for the artist, can be ruinous and terrible. It is a process of exposing yourself, leaving yourself vulnerable to the world and to yourself, and it is possible to lose yourself in that. But art is not just for the artist. Art is also for the audience. It is the best way there is to share yourself with others, to help others feel seen, to help them know that they are not alone, in a way that mere words never could. Art born from pain and grief, then, is a way to help others learn the lessons that you have learned in your own grief, to learn to forgive themselves. It is not a solution. It will not solve anyone's problems. It is a recognition of what comes in between the problem and the solution, and that is just as important. The Crow, by Obar's words, has been there for many during their own pain and grief. Obar, in turn, credits Joy Division with being there when he was dealing with his own. That is the power of art, this chain of people sharing their pain, making themselves vulnerable, and being there for those who come after. Friends, if you're still watching this far into the video, I just want to say thank you. If you liked the video and would like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. At the time of writing, I'm getting really close to the milestone of 25,000 subscribers, and it would be really awesome to hit it over the course of the summer. Clair Obscur is a really interesting game that really resonated with me, as it seems to have with a lot of other people, and I plan on talking about it more in other videos in the near future. I know my Lives of P video last year also got a lot of traction, so in case you were wondering, yes, I am working on a video covering additions to the lore made within the DLC. I also want to give a special thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who have pledged their hard-earned real-life cash to help me make better and more ambitious content. Chaotic, Pizza Requiem, Dusan Kowajevic, Rules in Place, Raxarox, Mikaru X, Unhealthy Caillou, Sir Darkon, Aurelia the 14th, Schmandolf the Schmay, Kirsten, Captain Swing, Devale, Mouse V, Lieria, Theo D, Noah Phoenix, The Smallest Church in Wienerville, Gassan Abanura, Patrizia Frabetti, Sninkelberg, Ziggy the 31st, Frondi, Yo-Yo Jojo Mojo, Tsai Voafehi, Dan Luther, Still Just Cow, Jose Armalos, William, Cabbage, Rekka, Alex Smith, Picayune, Hakan Boyum, Pete Lee, Shiny Emptyhead, That's All, Bell Mage, and Malachi Murphy. Thank you again to Mantis Sleep for sponsoring today's video. Until next time, everyone, take care.